Welcome, everybody. My name's David Wood, and it's my pleasure to chair London Futurists. And welcome to the first in a special series of webinars which have the overarching theme, Transhumanism, Future Scenarios. I envision perhaps 6 or 7 webinars in this series, perhaps more, over the next 12 to 18 months, which will collectively produce a record of the state of transhumanism in the mid-2020s. Here's my thinking that underpins this whole series. Ideas matter. Big ideas matter a lot. We humans are influenced by the ideas that are in our minds, whether they are active in the front of our minds or operating largely unconsciously somewhere at the back of our minds. If there are no good big ideas around, big ideas that people can collectively judge as being compelling and credible and worthy, then guess what? We tend to be dominated by smaller ideas. For example, we obsess about material possessions or short-term experiences, or comparing our social media profile with that of other people, or perhaps types of nationalism that affirm my country right or wrong, or my country first and to hell with all the others. 20 years ago, I thought that transhumanism would become a compelling, credible, big idea worthy of positively influencing the lives of more and more people. 20 years ago, in 2005, I started attending pub gatherings of what was called at the time Extropiaism, or UKH+, or the UK Transhumanist Association. These pub gatherings gave birth 3 years later, 2008, to what is now called London Futurists. And in London Futurists, we have discussed transhumanism on many occasions over the years, as you can see in our online archives, for example, on the London Futurist YouTube channel. But it's fair to say that the 2005 version of me would have been disappointed and surprised at how small the presence of transhumanism is, or seems to be, in the world in 2025. Perhaps we might think transhumanism is still on the slow, disappointing phase of a long exponential upward curve before reaching that fast and furious phase of adoption. Or perhaps we need a different mental model altogether to understand what is happening. Perhaps transhumanism needs to be reborn or regenerated, a bit like Doctor Who, with a new name and a different configuration of ideas. Or I'm sure some of you have got other suggestions. Well, that's all part of the general framing for this series that I am presenting to each of the speakers. The different speakers will surely respond to this framing in their own individual, unique ways, which is fine. I'm looking forward to diverse insights and provocations. For example, 7 weeks from today, that's on the 15th of March, we'll be hearing from Max More, who is often regarded as the founder of modern transhumanism. But today, to commence this series of webinars, we are truly privileged to have as our speaker Professor Stefan Lorenz Sorgner, who is one of the most active interpreters and exponents of transhumanist thinking within academia and beyond. Stefan is a philosophy professor at Jean Cabot University in Rome and has multiple other positions and appointments. He recently gave the 2024 Stanislaw Kamiński Memorial Lectures at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin, which was a 30-hour course dedicated to Euro-transhumanism. Well, we don't have 30 hours today, but I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the key themes from that lecture series. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Many thanks for that kind introduction and for inviting me to this wonderful series. Yes, I will be talking about Eurotranshumanism and the differences between other types of transhumanism, And it's taken me a while to get there, to get all the clarity on these issues where I am now. I mean, for me also, it started 25 years ago when I first became acquainted with transhumanism. And then many different steps appeared. I really tried to promote transhumanism, in particular in academia, because in academic circumstances, actually, it's got a very difficult stance. There's a lot of hesitation concerning dealing with transhumanism, even affirming it regarding it as a topic worthy of investigation. And it's been one of my main tasks actually to promote that, and to promote that in very different ways, sort of by starting an annual conference series. And I started that conference series in 2009, the Beyond Humanism conference series. And it's still ongoing. So if you want to find some additional information concerning that conference series, this year it will take place in Paris at the end of June. So please check out the beyondhumanism.org website. By the way, just before the 15th session of the Beyond Humanism conference series, there will be a wonderful event in Cluj, which is entirely dedicated to transhumanism. And you find information on that on the posthumanstudies.org website. I'll be a keynote speaker at that event. In addition, in order to actually get it approved, sort of get it acknowledged, get some respect in academic circles, I was always told, well, is there any academic journal, any proper academic journal which fulfills the appropriate criteria of being double-blind and peer-reviewed? And so as this hasn't been the case, at least not published by a proper university press. So together with James Hughes, we got together and we started the Journal of Posthuman Studies, which was launched in 2017. 2017 at John Cabot University. We had a big celebration. Martin Rosblatt actually gave the introductory lecture presenting the journal. And it's still ongoing, so please feel to check this out too if you want to publish some papers on transhumanism. Today, I'll giving some insights concerning Eurotranshumanism, classic transhumanism, and some further challenges which we are currently confronting. But I'll just giving some initial impulse presentation, and I'm looking forward to our further exchanges later on and the Q&A session. Elon Musk considers it highly likely that we are already living in a computer simulation. Not only is he the richest person in the world, he also hugely influential politically, and not just in the United States. In order to understand his thoughts and actions, you need to have studied transhumanism. It's this basic mental attitude and that not only underpins his decisions, but also forms the intellectual framework of Ray Kurzweil, Peter Thiel, and James O'Neill. Ray Kurzweil is a director of engineering at Google. Peter Thiel and Elon Musk founded PayPal. Peter Thiel created the Thiel Fellowship together with James O'Neill. In 2014, Vitalik Buterin, the future inventor of the cryptocurrency Ethereum, was awarded that fellowship. In 2021, Time magazine named Vitalik Buterin one of the 100 most influential people in the world. He donated more than $2 million then to the SENS Research Foundation back in 2018. The aim of this foundation is to increase the human health span by aiming to combat the disease of aging. And this is one of the central transhumanist objectives, which is accompanied by either the utopia of immortality or at least the vision of an indefinite extension of the human health span. From 2019 to 2021, James O'Neill was the CEO of the SENS Research Foundation. And following his re-election as President of the United States of America in 2024, Donald Trump announced his intention to nominate James O'Neill for the post of United States Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. This brief sketch of some transhumanist entanglements alone illustrates the financial and political power associated with a particular strand of transhumanism. The conservative political scientist and public intellectual Francis Fukuyama explained in 2004 why transhumanism is the most dangerous idea in the world. The former White House chief strategist and Trump advisor agreed with Fukuyama's assessment, but emphasized that the practice was even more dangerous than the theory, associated transhumanism with an aberration of humanity that was solely in the interests of the global world elite, with this criticism also containing anti-Semitic connotations. He published this in an introduction to an anti-transhumanist book. Russia's intellectual and spiritual thought leaders, the Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill I, and Alexander Dugin, were even more critical. Dugin explicitly describes transhumanism as the idea of the devil with whom the central evils of the Western world are associated, and which is seen as a decisive opponent of the truths of Christian orthodoxy. Transhumanism was historically founded by Julian Huxley in 1951. That's when he coined the term. Julian Huxley was a professor of zoology at King's College London, founding director of the UNESCO, and was involved in the conceptual background of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. His grandfather was Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Henry Huxley. His half-brother, Andrew Feeling Huxley, won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1963, and his brother Aldous Huxley wrote one of the most important utopian novels of the 20th century with his novel Brave New World. Like George Orwell's novel in 1984, it was decisively inspired by the Russian novel V by Yevgeny Ivanovich Zamyatin. All three novels thematize the political dystopias associated with the latest technologies. While Aldous Huxley implicitly warns against transhumanism in this way, his brother Julian Huxley established one of the decisive cultural currents of the present with transhumanism. At the beginning of the 1990s, FM 2013, Natasha Vita-More and Max More established the original transhumanism as an important cultural force in the public sphere, as David just said, sort of with Max More being one of the co-founders of sort of the contemporary version of transhumanism. And I'm very closely indebted to many of their insight. I'm very close to share many of their associations. In the early 2000s, classic transhumanism developed around Nick Bostrom, whose impact unfolded in particular through the Future of Humanity Institute at the University of Oxford, which he led from its foundation in 2005 until its closure in 2024. At the latest, with in 2024, it was financially supported by Elon Musk. And here we can see sort of the close connection between the classic transhumanism by Bostrom and sort of the idea suggested by the PayPal group, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and so on. Eurotranshumanism crystallized at the latest with the publication of my article, Nietzsche, the Overhuman and Transhumanism in the Journal of Evolution and Technology in 2009. It actually became one of the most cited Nietzsche articles ever written. In contrast to the classic transhumanism of Elon Musk and his circle of friends, Eurotranshumanism is decisively influenced by the continental European cultural tradition and distances itself decidedly from its libertarian basic attitude, which goes hand in hand with the dangerous political utopia and which assumes a silicon-based further development of humans, according to which we will already exist as downloaded personalities on hard drives in a few decades, and humans will possibly be put into zoos by superintelligence. Eurotranshumanism considers it more likely that we will first evolve as carbon-based beings, as we've always been cyborgs. The realization that we've always been cyborgs represents a radical break with the dualistic Western culture of the past 2,000 years, which has always understood humans as dualistic beings. That means as entities with a material body and an immaterial rational soul, with which the unchangeable human nature, the divine spark, the image of God, free will, autonomy is identified. A cyborg is an organism controlled by language. A kybernetes, that means the ancient Greek for the helmsman of an orc, of a ship, of the orc, that means an organism. So cyborg, a steered organism, a steered, like the steersman, the helmsman of a ship, a steered organism. And the organic prerequisites for acquiring the ability to speak arose around 300,000 years ago as a result of a genetic mutation. From then on, it was possible to upgrade certain organisms through education so that they were able to communicate by means of language, develop further mental abilities, and realize special personal characteristics. A complex interplay of both environmental and genetic changes leads to these specific characteristics. The traditional narrative of the Christian West was that humans became rational by means of a divine spark. Since 1869, the Catholic Church has argued that a rational soul joins the human body at the moment of fertilization, which is why humans already possess dignity from this point onwards. The Eurotranshumanist narrative that we've always been cyborgs tells an alternative story of how we came to reason, namely through the complex interplay of a genetic mutation and the parental and cultural upgrading that occurs in the context of upbringing. This view is also widely shared in classic transhumanism and other versions of transhumanism. In general, however, Eurotranshumanism represents a cultural and a philosophical alternative to the Anglo-American dominated narrative of classic transhumanism. The Eurotranshumanist approach criticizes libertarian, utopian, and naively hedonistic tendencies of classical transhumanism, epitomized by its focus on conquest, individual wealth, and superficial experiences, and proposes instead a model rooted in European intellectual cultural traditions. Drawing on art, literature, philosophy, and music, it argues for a nuanced perspective that utilizes the wisdom of the past from Heraclitus and Nietzsche to grasp the complexity of the post-human paradigm. Classic transhumanists such as Nick Bostrom, David Pearce, and Ray Kurzweil are in favor of utopias. Eurotranshumanism, on the other hand, considers this basic attitude to be extremely dangerous. This assessment applies to all forms of utopias and not just transhumanist ones. That means also to the utopia of a classless future society, the utopia of bodily resurrection at the end of days, or the utopia that we will live as uploaded personalities in a digital society controlled by a benevolent superintelligence. The central danger of utopias is to sacrifice the present in order to realize a perfect future social order that can never be implemented in practice. In utopias, the lives of people today are sacrificed to a future cloud cuckoo land, which is dangerous because it undermines the promotion of the quality of life of all people living today. Today's people are instrumentalized for realization of a distant utopia. And what I think what really matters now also, the quality of lives people living today must always be taken into consideration, and thereby in particular the relevance of an increased health span. Utopias have to do with ultimate justifications. Visions, on the other hand, are proposals that invite further reflection and discourse. It's this openness to alternatives and better scientific knowledge that characterizes Eurotranshumanism. Utopias are opposed to such basic attitude. All worldviews that affirm utopian goals are dangerous and should be rejected and fought against from Eurotranshumanist perspectives. A non-utopian utopia goes hand in hand with the possibility of contingent visions, which can serve as a basis for further consideration. Eurotranshumanist objectives are to be understood as visions and do not represent utopias. Compared to the classic transhumanism of Silicon Valley, Eurotranshumanism emphasizes the need for a new culture of transhumanism, and not one in which the aim is to become a billionaire, live without meaningful ties, and travel the world to create new experiences and Instagram stories and turn startups into unicorns in pop-up cities in Roatan and Chiang Mai. While classic transhumanism focuses on a lifestyle characterized by techno, Thailand, tantra, and tattoos, Eurotranshumanism focuses on the virtues of grandezza, raffinatezza, and fiducia. It emphasizes that we need art, literature, and music, as well as engagement with Heraclitus, Spinoza, Goethe, Schopenhauer, Wagner, and Nietzsche in order to live a flourishing life. The future needs the past in order to transform our dualistic ontological binaries into Eurotranshumanism and to realize the post-human paradigm shift. As recently as 2001, leading German philosopher Jürgen Habermas aptly pointed out that transhumanism had not yet had a broad intellectual impact. That was actually the case at the time. At the time, he characterized transhumanists as freaky intellectual, stealth-stylized Nietzscheans with all too familiar motives of the very German ideology. This assessment is no longer accurate, no longer accurate only a short time later, which is why he categorized transhumanism as a cult-like activity in 2014. By 2013, at the latest, however, transhumanism has made a decisive impact on the general public with the publication of Dan Brown's global bestseller, Inferno. Therein, actually, it was explicitly talked about and transhumanist associations were mentioned and dealt with. The entire plot circled around transhumanism. Since then, transhumanism and numerous phenomena associated with transhumanism have been represented in the media everywhere. At the Burning Man Festival in Hollywood, Netflix blockbusters, and also as part of the Venice Biennale. Transhumanism has been implicitly and explicitly addressed ever since, actually more often implicitly than explicitly. Transhumanism developed a strong impact early on, particularly in films. Arthur C. Clarke, who studied physics and mathematics at King's College London, wrote the screenplay for the 1968 Stanley Kubrick film 2001: Space Odyssey, which is considered a classic film in the context of transhumanism. While this film aptly depicts a specific transhumanist utopia, the 1997 film Gattaca represents a technological dystopia in an enormously entertaining way, as it depicts a society in which the significance of a person depends on the quality of their genes and not on their membership of the species Homo sapiens. The 2014 film Transcendence, starring Johnny Depp, was a financial flop, but it aptly portrayed a utopia of classic transhumanism, namely the utopia of a digital human personality. It is therefore hardly surprising that Elon Musk makes an appearance in this film as Elon Musk. Elon Musk also makes a guest appearance in the extremely successful and usually successful and entertaining US sitcom Big Bang Theory. Transhumanist themes, motives, and reflections are also regularly discussed, portrayed, and debated there. Even fascinating transhumanist artworks are referred in this series. The green fluorescent rabbit Alba stands out in particular, one of the most remarkable bio-artworks by the wonderful artist Eduardo Katz, who also coined the term bio-art in 1997. What exactly can be described as bio-art is still an open question. Patrizia Piccinini's sculpture Still Life with Stem Cells from 2002 could just as easily be described as bio-art as a famous modeled ear on the forearm of the performance artist Stellar. Even though the works of Katz, Piccinini, and Stellar are often mentioned in the context of transhumanism, they have stronger intellectual links to Eurotranshumanism than to classic transhumanism. And this also applies to the artistic work of the excellent and fascinating German composer Sven Helbig, the Polish sculptor Joanna Kruszowska, and the Austrian painter Tatjana von Leis, who have a particularly close connection to Eurotranshumanism. Sven Helbig's music drama From Lärm der Welt on the Noise of the World is one of the most fascinating operas of our time. Joanna Kruszowska's sculptures deal explicitly with the intellectual creativity of continental European cultural history. Tatjana von Leis' paintings are deeply anchored in the complex web of post-human reflections. It can be assumed that the age of transhumanism has only just begun with these developments. The effectiveness of technologies is constantly intensifying. CRISPR-Cas9 was developed in 2012 and has radically changed the world of biotechnology. ChatGPT was presented to the public in 2022, just like 3 years ago. Musk's Neuralink will apply to human computer interfaces in 2024. The possibilities of the latest technologies are enormous. In any case, I can hardly wait for a post-human future to occur. What might be helpful for further discussion is to clearly distinguish several versions of transhumanism. So I do want to highlight a couple of maybe distinctions which are particularly relevant in that context. So in 1951, Julian Huxley coined the term transhumanism. However, our contemporary understanding of transhumanism was strongly determined by the original transhumanism of FN 2013, Natasha Vita-More, and Max More. The texts are your transhumanism monitoring and stimulating your personal rate of growth in a rapidly changing world by FN 2030 from 1989, and Transhumanism Towards a Futurist Philosophy by Max More from 1990 are foundational sources for contemporary transhumanism. Natasha Vita Moore, who already wrote a Transhumanist Manifesto in 1983, has been the central female voice promoting transhumanism for more than 4 decades. In many respects, their version is similar to many of my own suggestions, which can be called Eurotranshumanism. An alternative outlook was presented by Nick Bostrom and his allies. It can be referred to as classic transhumanism. The following 12 alternatives might provide a helpful overview concerning central differences between classic transhumanism and Eurotranshumanism. So firstly, Peirce abolitionism and Bostrom's long-termism represent utopias which are being affirmed within classic transhumanism. Eurotranshumanism presents suggestions based on current scientific developments, but rejects the affirmation of utopias due to the dangers that come about when the present is sacrificed for a future that might never occur. I've already talked a bit more about that before. Secondly, classic transhumanists have presented hyper-Renaissance ideals of perfection, while Euro-transhumanists accept the radical diversity of concepts of the good, and hence highlights the right of morphological freedom, and particularly stresses it. Classic transhumanism described the world in an optimistic manner. Like Buddhism, Euro-transhumanism identifies our basic personal condition with dukkha, the irresolvable condition of permanent suffering due to our having wants, desires, and longings. Fourthly, the universal validity of certain values and norms is upheld by classic transhumanists. Thus, the issue of neocolonial implications might arise. A Nietzschean perspectivism is being seen as plausible Euro-transhumanism, by which many paternalistic implications are avoided. Fifthly, utilitarianism is a dominant ethical theory in classic transhumanism. A contextual hermeneutic understanding of ethics is upheld by Euro-transhumanists. Sixthly, politically, classic transhumanism can be identified with libertarianism. Freedom plays a central role in Euro-transhumanism too, but its political position can be described more appropriately by the concept of a social democratic version of liberalism. Seventhly, to realize immortality is a central goal within classic transhumanism. A radically increased health span is a widely shared goal according to transhumanism. And so to see it as appropriate, no, really immortality in a verbal sense cannot be realized. But what can be realized and what most people want is a significantly increased health span. And that should actually be aspired for. Eighthly, those who focus on mind uploading, namely classic transhumanists, defend a silicon-based transhumanism, whereas those who stress that we've always been cyborgs and that gene technologies and brain-computer interfaces are the most promising ways to promote personal flourishing, namely Euro-transhumanists, represent a carbon-based transhumanism. Ninthly, classic transhumanism regards the risks and possibilities of superintelligence as our most central challenges. The coming about of artificial general intelligence and superintelligence are not likely in the near future scenarios, according to Eurotranshumanism. Not disrespecting the impact and the relevance of AI, but what we're confronted with so far are weak AI, and sort of we cannot even conceptualize what general AI and superintelligence stands for. Tenthly, a normative goal according to classic transhumanism is to overcome suffering. According to Eurotranshumanism, we should focus on realistic goals by trying to successfully deal with some of our most central challenges, by realizing that this is an as good as it gets solution. 11thly, classic transhumanism sees itself in the tradition of the Enlightenment. Euro-transhumanism stresses an ambiguous relationship with the philosophical foundations of the Enlightenment, as it's highly critical of naively affirming a version of logocentrism. 12thly, Nietzsche is not seen as an ancestor of transhumanism according to classic transhumanists. The relevance of identifying Nietzsche as an ancestor of transhumanism can hardly be overestimated according to Euro-transhumanism. That, for example, is also strongly affirmed by original transhumanists like Max More. So now I'm looking forward to our further reflections on transhumanism and the current challenges and questions we're facing. And hopefully these couple of distinctions are also helpful for bringing about a more nuanced discussion. So I'm very much looking forward to your questions now.
Many thanks. Well, I think I may score about 6 or 7 for Eurotranshumanism and 3 or 4 that I'm less sure that I'm in that camp. But there was a lot to get our heads round. Can I take you back to when you said there are some virtues that are particularly important for Eurotranshumanism? Because you contrasted that with perhaps quite superficial goals for what you call classical transhumanism. You spoke the virtues part very quickly. Could you just go through that again?
So there are actually, I mentioned 3 virtues, but there are actually a couple of further ones because, so politically, I refer to the relevance of an ethics of autonomy, even though ethics, so a liberal, but a social democratic liberal understanding of liberalism, which means in the end, it is rooted in an understanding in ethics of autonomy. Even though I'm aware sort of ontologically also on the basis of sort of the thinking in the continental tradition, autonomy ontologically as something which actually exists doesn't make sense. But it's a wonderful ethical achievement that sort of we have the right of autonomy, making decisions for ourselves, how we want to conceptualize ourselves. And now the question is, how can that best be achieved? So what do we need in order to actually be able to make an autonomous decision? And here the virtues do come in. And one of the central virtues is, so it starts with, I didn't mention that before, mindfulness. Mindfulness in the sense you need to analyze. You need to have an understanding of what you actually want. You need to be able to distinguish the norms which have been imposed upon you and that what you actually subscribe to. A second virtue, another virtue is once you've realized what you actually want, you need to be able to stick to it. You need to be able to actually put that into practice. So another virtue which comes into play is that of self-control. It's so easy to say, no, I really affirm, being trust in another person. I stick to the things I said, and then eventually you don't act accordingly. So self-control is absolutely fundamental. Actually, once you realize that, you need to do your best in order to act upon it. These are just two implications, 2 virtues, which are sort of relevant for just realizing for being in an ethics of autonomy in a liberal society. And then, of course, you need to go. But these are just the general prerequisites for actually being able to making autonomous decisions. And then the second question is, which virtues do you actually need to live a good life? And I'm aware, well, there's not one concept of the good life which we all subscribe to. There's a great diversity. There's a great variety of different concepts of the good life. And I'm presenting a couple of suggestions which I've realized they are really fundamental for me. I'm not sure whether they are fundamental for anyone else. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but I'm presenting that as a couple of suggestions. And these are the ones of, I call them sort of grandezza, raffinatezza, and fiducia. Grandezza in the sense of greatness. So whatever you do it properly, work on that. And don't just, you realize you want to develop the transhumanist philosophy, put your best effort into that. Exchange, have discussions with a great variety of different people, read a lot, work a lot, really, really do all your best to put that into practice. Secondly, raffinatezza. So it's also developing your own idiosyncratic taste. Realize that might not apply to anyone else, but it's sort of applying your own specific refined needs. Maybe it's absolutely weird to other people, but realize them, stick to them, and develop them further. And the third thing is something which I think is sort of trust, fiducia. you need to have people you can fully trust. So it's not just being focused on yourself and your own well-being. As long as I can get my kicks, as long as I can have a good time, you know, I might say something to another person in one situation, and the next day I just completely disregard the other person. You know, you need to have these fixed bonds, these trustworthy bonds to other people. So as a personal confession concerning the good life, I highly stress greatness, refinement, and trust. Grandezza, raffinatezza, and fiducia. But sort of the other virtues I mentioned before are just like prerequisites, which I think are helpful for anyone living in a liberal society who strongly want to embrace autonomy, who actually want to live in accordance with the economy. So first you need to realize actually what it is you want, and then you need to have self-control in actually to put that into practice. But the other suggestions are the ones, you know, they are more my personal confessions. Maybe they resonate with someone else. Maybe some constructive interferences occur, but maybe they just apply to myself.
So a comment to the audience. We'll be taking questions from the Q&A window mainly. If you see a question in the Q&A window and you think, yeah, you'd really like to hear that answered quickly, move your mouse to the thumb and give it a thumbs up, and we'll take that soon. Let me try and represent Max More for a minute, because Stefan, you were saying there are dangers of utopianism. Max has always said that his transhumanism is not utopianism. He uses a different word, extropianism, which means step-by-step progress without having a particular end in mind, and reversing. So is that a word you're happy to get behind, extropianism?
Exactly, and that's also what I mentioned, sort of already hinted at during in the presentation. So I'm very close to a lot of ideas which Max More is presenting. So his extropianism is more of a vision. You take some realistic analysis of what's currently going on in the sciences, and then step by step you work towards it. You move on. And in contrast to that, sort of, you know, with Letter to Utopia and people like Bostrom, there's more of a shared of a really strong notion of utopia, and I've strong hesitations because of partly also because of sort of me coming from brought up in a German context with a very bad track record of any type of utopias, both from the radical right as well as from the radical left. And that's why sort of the various concerning utopias apply, but any sort of slow progress where we realistically take into consideration what is actually going on, where it's not supposed to be realized something. No, we're going to sacrifice the lives of the people living at the moment in order to realize them fantastic ideas which probably can never be realized in at all. This is where I see highly dangerous issues, and I'm just want to stress a warning in order to progress like that.
You're mentioning about long-termism. I do notice that when people are angry about transhumanism, they often pick on long-termism and say, you just caring about the future, you're not caring about the people here and now. And so I've distinguished my own self from long-termism. I say, of course, I think about the future. We need to be living in a sustainable way, so we're not damaging the future. But absolutely, we need to care about people in the here and now. And so to that extent, I would count myself in the Eurotranshumanism side of your equation. Do you have any sympathy for the long-termist point of view?
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. And I did actually briefly mention long-termism as one of the prime examples of a utopia. So that's why here it is, that is the best example where it comes out. No, as long as just a minor group of rich, intelligent men survive, then it doesn't matter if 99% of the population dies out. So that is exactly one of the attitudes which I find highly dangerous and highly cynical as well. And so long-termism is indeed one of the prime examples of a utopian version of transhumanism, and which clearly demonstrates how the good lives, the concept of the good lives of the people currently alive are being sacrificed. And now, what transhumanism does go along also with a revised self-understanding of who we are as human beings. So not as us standing out in creation, as being the only ones who have something special, but we are only gradually different from other living beings. And as a consequence, now there is something like, which is also widely shared among many transhumanists, personhood for non-human animals. We need to take animals into consideration as well, in the same way as we do takes the suffering of humans into consideration. So it is sort of this, what Singer calls with speciesism. So species is not a meaningful category. What is meaningful is in how far individual entities can suffer or not. And in that way, yeah, this is also shows no sustainability, taking the suffering of non-human animals, of all non-human animals into consideration. All lives matter. The lives of current people matter, and not just the survival of humanity in 2,000 years' time.
Let's look at your second point in that list of 12. We've discussed long-termism and utopianism, but the second point was a contrast between a focus on perfectionism versus, I think it was, an appreciation of diversity and morphological freedom. So Didier Cornell, who's a leading transhumanist from Belgium, he says, this is very interesting, Stefan. If he understands you correctly, you consider European transhumanists should not seek perfection because of diversity. He says that he somehow disagrees because although perfection is not realistic, certainly not immediately, but we should always be looking to find the best possible world. Shouldn't we have the best possible world in mind?
I have no idea what the best possible world stands for. This is sort of my general very. So yeah, in order to highlight sort of what I meant with that specific point is there was in Transhumanist Values an article by Nick Bostrom with that who clearly highlighted we cannot all achieve the Renaissance ideal. We cannot all be Renaissance geniuses, but we can aspire to be like them. So he clearly highlights, no, it is his understanding of perfection is that of a hyper-humanist, a hyper-Renaissance ideal of perfection. So he clearly affirms the same binary ideals which were affirmed by traditional humanism in the Renaissance. It also includes the same type of binary structures concerning further binary distinction between men and women and so on, rather than embracing the fluidity of all existence and the great diversity of all existence. So as a consequence, now when you actually ask when you ask people what they associate with what it means to live a good life, then you get a great diversity of different responses. And there's probably not one insight to which all people agree. The one thing which most people associate with a flourishing life, with a good life, is an increased health span. So that's why I think sort of that is the one thing which comes closest to universal notion of perfection, to a capacity which most people identify with the good life. But even that aspect is not being shared by all of them. But I think sort of an increased health span is something which is the one entity which psychological studies do show that in some way or other, people say if you live longer healthily, most people say in some way that contributes to me living a good life. And why is that the case? Well, health either is intrinsically valuable, it really makes me happy just being healthy, or the other thing is, well, health is being useful. Health is a means for being able to achieve what I want to achieve. And for a priest, that might be, helping the poor. For someone else, that might be flying to Mars. And for a third person, it might be just, trying out the latest wines and traveling and discovering new spaces on Earth. So the goals are very different, but in one respect, living longer healthily is a means is instrumentally helpful for achieving them, and for others it's intrinsically, they say it just living longer healthily makes me happy. But in some way, more than 90% of people agree that no, living longer healthily is actually what promotes their quality of life. And that's why this is the one thing which needs to be generally also taken into consideration from a political stance. And that means a lot of changes would have to occur concerning political decisions on what to found concerning funding, what type of medical research should be supported. However, so just to sort of put that into perspective, so on the one hand, we've got the understanding, basically it's a hyperhumanism, which Nick Bostrom has affirmed in the Transhumanist Values article, a very simple-minded one. Basically, the traditional goals, certain goals for man, Superman on Viagra, and for women, Wonder Woman with Botox as something which should be achieved. And on the other hand, we've something, well, there are some things, in particular increased health span, which is widely shared as being promoting for living, as being beneficial for living a good life. But most things are so strongly connected to one's own individual tribes, longings, and wants, that this needs to be taken into consideration. That's why I'm extremely critical of any strong notion of perfection, and that's why I'm rather focus on the notion of morphological freedom, that people should have the right to live in accordance with their idiosyncratic tribes, as long as they don't harm any other person by doing so.
So you're getting thumbs up and you're getting support from, for example, Natasha Vitamore, who says it's essential and even fundamental to remember that health longevity is at the core of transhumanism. Something that everybody can agree with. In which case, then, what kind of research would you request should be done by scientists, or what should politicians be backing? For example, I'll pick another question from Didier. It also is at the top of the list. Should we be prioritizing sharing our health data for longevity research rather than individuals keeping it private?
Yeah, wonderful question, Didier. Yes, it is. Many economists are currently stressing data is the new oil. And I'm fully in agreement with that. Obviously, we mustn't take that too literally in the sense data is not oil. Oil is a natural resource, and digital data is intellectual property. So ontologically, these are two different things. However, what is being meant by that phrase, by that insight, is digital data is so strongly related now to insights, political flourishing, power, financial relations, is so fundamentally relevant for any of our enterprises. So no matter what we do, if we want to do a political decision making, the more digital data you have, the better you can actually make some reliable political decisions. If you want to make some research in the field, some university academic research, again, it is in the social sciences, in the natural sciences, even in the humanities, it is now focused, it is based upon digital data. But that also applies concerning innovation, sort of entrepreneurs. If you've got the right and a lot of digital data with respect to the field you're working on, then you can innovate something new. And last but definitely not least, is sort of the field of medical innovation and biotechnological innovations. And here, because, as I said before, an increased health span is sort of the thing which comes closest to what is commonly shared as something which increases the quality of life. What is needed in order to promote research in the field and in the medical field is to have a lot of insights concerning to have a lot of information concerning digital data when it comes to correlations between biometric data and sort of the effects of these the consequences of the biometric data. So what is needed is basically we need to know your genetic data, the likelihood of having certain diseases, genetic data, and also behavioral data, and concerning the outcome, sort of which qualities do you have, which qualities you develop, the likelihood or genetic data, how you react to certain drugs. Do certain drugs work on you? Maybe it is just dependent on your certain physiological, psychophysiological constitutions. Again, sort of correlations between digital data and sort of the outcome, the qualities you have, or how you react to certain drugs is extremely helpful and necessary. So no matter which field that applies, basically it is a very complex entanglement between the genes, between your behavior, between your education, the surrounding. Do you live in a warm climate? Do you live in a cold climate? How do you behave? Do you, in general, are you a hectic person? Are you a calm person? And in order to also to analyze that incredibly complex entanglement between the various aspects, we need to get as many digital data as possible concerning all this great variety of different aspects. So in the same way, I talk about, so we need about in cars or in planes, we use we basically have a lot of different sensors in order to understand in order to understand one specific part of the plane becomes dysfunctional. We already know, and the more data we have, we know that a certain thing will break in the engine. There's a 10% chance in the engine that will break and it will become dysfunctional in 6 months' time. But of course, if you want to get on a plane, you don't want to have any risk on the plane crashing. So even if there's only like a 10% chance in 6 months' time, what do? You do exchange the specific parts already when you realize that specific probability is given. And with the same kind of analysis, basically with various digital sensors moving into our bodies, in our body being monitored 24/7 with respect to the various sensors, we can also realize the same type of procedure on our human body. So we don't have to wait until the blood pressure gets too high. We don't have to wait until the blood sugar level gets too high. We already realize, okay, if you continue to live like that, if you don't change your diet, given the appropriate amount of information and sensors inside our body, then these issues will become relevant for you. And so we can already change with the appropriate information, we can change our behavior and adapt our behavior so that the likelihood of getting high blood pressure doesn't even occur. And that's already happening in the medical sciences in different fields. For example, with high blood pressure, for example, sort of what counted as high blood pressure used to be much higher 30 years ago than what it is now. So basically what was done in order to take some high blood pressure pills, what is seen as normal was simply lowered. And as a consequence, people start taking the pills from earlier onwards. And as a consequence, the likelihood of having a heart attack or having a stroke significantly gets lowered. And all of these are means for increasing the human health span. So what we needed is really to be able to collect all of the different data. And that's what I mean, genetic data, behavioral data, data concerning your upbringing, your educational, and the more data we have, the better we can intervene, the higher the likelihood of increasing our health span. And unfortunately, the way things are realized now, the way digital data being treated nowadays is not such that it seems to promote, that it does promote human flourishing, because there's not proper democratic use of digital data in no country. So in the United States, we've got a very open, very libertarian way. So it is about the big companies being able to collect the data. Now some changes get applied with Stargate. So I'm very curious what will happen in that respect. But so far, it's been big companies who are able to collect digital data, selling and collecting data, sharing data. But it is still a problem of getting data, collecting data comprehensively. And then we've got China. China's solution is actually, I don't want to live in China, but China's solution is much more effective than the solution in the United States, because here we've got an authoritarian state which basically said, if you want to have your company, if you want to run your company in China, then you need to be ready to share your digital data with us. And so they really managed to get hold of all the digital data within China. But not only within China, but also outside of China. With TikTok, Huawei, and Alibaba and all the other enterprises. So basically, because these companies also need to share the data within China with the government. So let's see what will happen with TikTok. But so here we're already seeing there's really a strong political fight going on about the data, and how, because they have realized the impact and the relevance of data, in particular the United States and China. On the other hand, the European Union is extremely stupid in their way of handling data, in particular with respect to the GDPR. Basically, they've made it extremely difficult to collect data comprehensively. Basically, you always need to click and accept cookies and so on. And all the different other regulations are such that like a comprehensive data collection is enormously difficult. And that has economic consequences, that has consequences concerning research, political enterprises. If data is in your oil, then basically that will have very sad and devastating consequences for the European Union, because basically the one source which is needed for entrepreneurship, for research in social sciences, natural sciences, for policy making, the data is not available in such a manner as it's available in the United States and in China. And so far I haven't presented any solution to that issue. I have for example, in the book, We've Always Been Cyborgs. However, I just wanted to mention, so digital data and collecting and sharing digital data is enormously relevant, and in particular, in order to reach and realize the goal of an increased health span, we really need to rethink our way of dealing with digital data. And I strongly urge the best minds of our generation basically to get together and to find a democratic way of dealing with digital data in order to reach that goal of an increased health span, and not that it just benefits Zuckerberg, Musk, and some oligarchs in the United States, or the authoritarian regime in China, because so far the regulations are such that it doesn't seem to promote something like an increased health span in a democratic manner. And that is something which I'm arguing for. I'm trying to convince people of that it shouldn't benefit the few, but the few or a certain authoritarian regime, we really need to make sure that an increased health span is accessible for all people.
Well, that was a fantastic answer. You talked a little bit there about the role of companies and innovation to help achieve these goals. There are a few questions about how companies, or indeed how CEOs should operate. There's a guest called Jesus Christ who says, or asks, does the transhumanism you envision, does it eliminate inheritance of excessive wealth? Does it put an upper limit on how much one human can own?
No, thank you. It's a very good question. So I do stress, well, one of the central insights of Euro-transhumanism is that in order to protect freedom, you need to limit negative freedom. If you just focus on negative freedom in the libertarian sense, that will end up exactly in that hierarchy between the haves and not haves, in an oligarchy with extremely problematic implications. And in that way, actually, negative freedom undermines itself, because the ones who have no means, who have no access to the basic funds who have no access to getting the appropriate education, university education, you know, fundamental means for living. They're not really free to make the choices they want to make. So libertarianism undermines the freedom of choice. And that's why, yes, that strong hierarchy between the haves and not haves must be dealt with, must be regulated. How that can be done, I don't want to present an answer which basically applies to all the countries in all the different situations. Whether it's like, as you suggested now, introducing an inheritance tax. It might be the right solution in certain contexts. Maybe it's not the right solution in a different context. But here, I think we really need to take the specific context in a country into considerations to see how to apply the goal and how to guarantee that certain financial stability, you know, having something to eat, having a place to live, having, you know, security concerning personal rights, having the possibility also of a good education, of an infrastructure, and what I think is also fundamentally important for making proper choices yourself is a universal health insurance. So that's the one thing. So that's the one thing. One of my strong criticisms also of the United States. So because there's 30 million people who are basically uninsured, and that has consequences concerning their life expectancy there, because people basically live 6 years less than in the European Union, even though the medical technologies they have it can be much better than the ones available in the European Union. So yes, so I'm not responding on which specific measures like inheritance tax and so on should be implemented. It might be the case that that's the appropriate solution in a specific situation. But I think sort of the way we should formulate, or the way we should think about these things, is sort of, we need to guarantee that the ones on the lower scale of the financial, with the lower social status, have the possibility of making decisions, have the possibility of getting a proper education, and also reaching a better social standing if they put the appropriate effort into that. What that means in specific circumstances needs to be dealt with, and because here I think really the specific circumstances do matter. But the goal, you're right, yes, a too strong gap between the haves and not haves undermines freedom and the freedom of choice. And we need to do our best, and that's one of the reasons why I think the political arrangement in the United States is highly problematic. Having 30 million people, before calling an ambulance, they think, can I afford that? Will that run me into debts out of which I will not be able to get anymore? I've got students at John Cabot University, where I also teach a course on post-human studies, introducing transhumanism, by the way. I've got students here who basically, because they cannot afford health insurance in the United States because of certain preconditions, they say, no, that's why I'm coming to Europe. And I find that devastating. I just imagining a person, just because of certain preconditions, sort of the insurance cost would be too high in order to be able to afford them. We are rich enough, we've established enough measures so that, a proper liberal democracy needs to include a universal healthcare system. And that's, one of my central criticisms of classic transhumanism. Thank you.
We should have some questions now about AI. In your list of 12 points, the one which I most strongly disagreed with you, and I agreed with many of them, the one I most strongly disagreed with when you said there's no likelihood of there being superintelligence or AGI anytime soon. Tony Zarneski has asked a question about this. He comments that you seem to ignore the pace of AI development, which may lead to AI taking control over humans, perhaps in just a decade. And if that happens, if AI becomes smart enough to self-develop outside of our control, it will in effect become a new species superior to us. So how are you actually proposing to take your vision of transhumanism forwards? If it's going to take many decades to move forwards, then that's going to be too slow into it, especially if there's more political disruption because of the pace of automation, then a few decades is too long.
I disagree that the speed of AI is slow. It is enormously fast. So when I talk about the AI, and I do take that into consideration, and I realize also the AI which we're currently confronted with, they are all forms of weak AI. And so far, even with respect to weak AI, there's so many further developments which still need to occur first. So I'm not excluding the possibility of AGI and superintelligence. However, based on what these notions stand for, so far, I think they're very far away still. And let me explain you why this is the case. And I think weak AI is sufficient for realizing actually many of the goals we've talked about here, for realizing an increased health expectancy. All we need is the weak AIs, even in a more complex, in a more efficient way, and we're permanently generating more efficient weak AIs every year, every decade. However, what do we mean by a strong AI? What do we mean by a superintelligence? So with a strong AI, we already have sort of an AI which is able of imitating human intelligence in all different fields, and at least imitating them in all the different capacities, comparable human-like capacities. The superintelligence still goes beyond that in a significant manner, surpasses human capacity, adds new capacities. So AGI is just imitating human intelligence in all the different, and having the same type of level of human intelligence. What do we mean by human intelligence? Human intelligence, it's a difficult notion. I mean, human intelligence for 100 years now, if we want to measure an intelligence test, if we want to measure intelligence, then we use an intelligence test. And only for about a bit more than 100 years, we've got standardized intelligence tests. And they're usually about testing the capacity of numerical thinking, linguistics thinking, and spatial thinking. That's traditionally just counts as intelligence. Then what else could count as intelligence? What else could be relevant, or is that all there is to intelligence? There could also be something like emotional intelligence. There could be entrepreneurial intelligence. There could be musical intelligence, or maybe something like sporty intelligence. And there's also types of intelligence. Would an AGI also be able to play the piano like Trifonov, a wonderful pianist, by the way? Trifonov is amazing. Or to play tennis like Djokovic. So is that part of what an AGI would have to be capable of doing? So just to clarify, the notion of intelligence and what we mean by AGI is already problematic. Then AGI, in order to be able to imitate all the different types of intelligences and capacities, would mean, well, what do we identify? And if it also as human capacity, and what do I identify as maybe something like emotional intelligence? But with emotional intelligence, that means we also would have to have emotions. We would have to have not only emotions, but normally what is prerequisite for emotions, initially it's being alive, being conscious, being self-conscious, having emotions. There's a lot of there's an enormous baggage what actually just comes along with emotional intelligence, and having human-like capacities so far. And then I look at what are the capacities which we actually have at the moment. There is not even an algorithm which is alive, and the minimum prerequisite for like then consciousness, emotions, feelings, pain, pleasure, self-consciousness, recognizing yourself in the mirror, competence in making decisions. And the minimum prerequisite for all of that is being alive. But we don't even have a living algorithm. And then if you ask, well, how can we even conceptualize a living algorithm, a living digital entity? Then the response Stephen Hawking did give, he said, well, actually, there are the computer viruses. According to him, computer viruses are alive. According to biologists, they are not alive. because it is not only that you're a self-replicating entity, that you're moving by yourself from environment to environment, but an additional prerequisite is that you've got your own metabolism. And neither the coronavirus or the COVID virus nor the computer virus does have a metabolism. So metabolism meaning being able to generate energy by itself, being able to eat, drink, and digest, and thus to generate energy by themselves. So I do find the computer virus as an extremely fascinating, maybe even quasi-living entity. However, so if we look back in time, when did life exist on Earth? And that might be actually one of the strongest arguments in favor of the coming about also of AGI and superintelligence. So there was no life up until 3.5 billion years ago. So the Earth came about 4.5 billion years ago. It took about 1 billion years until the first living entities came about. How did it happen? We don't know. It was probably some lightning. It was warm. It was water. It was probably maybe in the environment of a volcano. And then something magical happened. No, something happened, probably maybe a volcano eruption, lightning, and then some individual entities which had the capable of moving by themselves, bacteria actually developed. And then it took a really, really long time. That was 3.5 billion years ago. And when did humans come about? Well, the last common ancestor between humans and apes came about 6 million years ago. There's a lot gap between 3.5 billion and 6 million years ago. And then between 6 million and Homo sapiens sapiens coming about 300,000 years ago. So 300,000 years ago was a time when a certain genetic mutation occurred, which enables humans to develop language. And so, so 300,000 years up until now, and now we've got all the different technologies and wonderful achievements we've realized. So, but it took us 3.5 billion years since the initial forms of life. But we don't even have any initial forms of life in the digital realm. We have maybe something quasi-living with computer viruses. But in order to have emotions, in order to have self-consciousness and so on, digital consciousness, we would need to be alive. We would need consciousness, self-consciousness, emotions, pain, pleasure experience. And, we are so far away from that. I cannot yet even conceptualize how that could take place. And that's why I think, and I do see Moore's law. I do the incredibly fast development of AI. So, however, sort of in order to get something like live consciousness and so on, that is, and I'm not saying it's impossible. Again, however, we are still so far away from that. That's why I'm extremely hesitant concerning AGI and superintelligence. And I think all we need is weak AI so far and for the next decades in order to really have significant breakthroughs when it comes to something like an increased health span, and living 150 years. So
I'm partly there with you, and you've made me move my position somewhat towards you on that point, because I do agree that I think we should keep AI as a tool without having sentience, without having spontaneity, or without having consciousness, or even without making its own decisions. All of that is dangerous. And there are others who also count themselves as transhumanists who want to hurry up and build a sentient AGI as quickly as possible. So I think there are constraints there. I think the danger still exists even with a weak AI if we're not careful, because we're already being manipulated by algorithms. We're spending time on social media sites because the algorithms are manipulating us. Netflix algorithms are making us watch things. YouTube algorithms are making us watch things. And unless we are more mindful and self-disciplined, as you said earlier, we may be in trouble. But I want to pursue a little bit of Tony's question further. Again, the question is, well, what is your proposal to move transhumanism forwards more quickly? And I want to feed in what Natasha asks as well. She also asks, well, how can transhumanism become more of a force for humanity's health and well-being? What steps can transhumanism propose to make the political structures take responsibility for the bad things you've already discussed, the 30 million people who don't have any healthcare and so on. What should we transhumanists be doing? Is it just science, or is there more to it than science?
Yeah, great question. First, let me really just as an additional comment to what you said concerning the danger of weak AI, because I'm completely on your side. I completely agree that there are enormous dangers associated with weak AI, but they always go along with humans feeding this weak AI in the sense of when we on social media, the weak AI challenges with generative language models. I mean, finding out a very easy way of creating a virus which is deadly, which is airborne, whereby you manage to get substances to create such a virus in order to realize human extinction or extinction of life, and by means of using substances which are easy to get hold of, and weak AI is sufficient for helping crazy people, terrorists, in order to bring about such deadly, highly dangerous viruses. And so the interaction between humans and weak AI and generative large language models and so on is extremely dangerous. And so we need to be also very careful on, and these are tricky questions. So who has access basically to some of these who has access to some of these databases? If it's easy to generate such a deadly virus, then and anyone could get hold of the information by means of a weak AI, then we are in deep trouble. And that's also what connects us. That's what connects us to the next question, sort of concerning the political implications. What is the appropriate political way, circumstances on how to regulate things? And what you said later on, what can we transhumanists do to put things into practice? So my current response is, firstly, what I sort of hinted at earlier, I do subscribe to sort of a social liberal democracy, because that's where universal health insurance is provided to everyone, because then basically we increase the average health span of most people living in a specific country. So that's why I think a social liberal democracy is my current best response. It's my as good as it gets response. And I'm stressing that factor because I'm aware of like the dynamism of also not only of what goes on in the world, but also of norms and ethics and values and political structures. Actually, if we manage to develop a certain type of political algorithm which actually might find better solutions than what some human, then I'm open, to moving also beyond the limits of a liberal democracy. I still find it, I'm very hesitant in that respect, extremely hesitant, because I still cannot imagine such an algorithm, but that's what I mean by sort of a politics of fluidity. That means I don't think we should say, in the same way as it applies to any other political system, I don't have the final answer to anything. I'm not saying a social liberal democracy is the best answer now, and it will be the best answer in 500 years' time, in 1,000 years' time. That would be absolutely absurd. So we need to take the changing circumstances into consideration, and then make appropriate adaptations to what actually does best and how to best serve our personal interest. And I'm just trying to refocus the debate. So what is really in our widely shared personal interest? And here I do come back to what is widely shared in transhumanism, or what is generally shared in transhumanism, and that's a universal. That's an increase of the health span, and that's something we need to get much more money into promoting these fields. We need to get further political initiatives in order to promote that, and then we also traditionally it's been sort of who's funding the research in order to make such risky research, and traditionally it's been such that in risky research has usually been supported by the outsiders, maybe by billionaires, by the ones who believe in a certain thing, because traditionally it's been that institutions, democratic institutions are slow, are not very daring, they're not daring to invest in something which is overly risky. So here I see a lot of potential or a lot of need for revising the focus. But that is a consequence of, well, we first need to have the money in order to be able to spend it also on some, maybe to be willing to have the possibility on spending it on some riskier research. And here the way to get money is, again, the best way to get money is we need the digital data, because digital data is in new oil. So we need to find a way, a democratic, liberal way of being able to collect a lot of digital data in the circumstance of social liberal democracy. And then the government has a possibility to also invest in some more risky feature and riskier feature. And that would be a shift rather than in something, rather than in something which is also where the chances of getting through being successful is very high, in order to have the openness. And in addition, the additional goal of realizing, promoting longevity, promoting increased health span needs to be widely accepted, more openly accepted, also on a political level, in order, and not just to deal with cancer and Alzheimer and Parkinson. Of course, cancer, Alzheimer and Parkinson are extremely important, but sort of because the other things apply to all persons, they are so fundamental, I'm always telling my students, so at the, look, my student, you're 20 years old now, you're realizing you're now at the peak of your psychophysiological flourishing, in your bodily capacities, you've been growing, you've been getting stronger, and now from now on, everything's going down the hill from the age of 20 onwards. Wrinkles will appear, gray hair will appear, your strength, your stamina will go down. That will start for men first. Then women, it starts a bit later. And these are the issues which need to be changed, because the mutations which occur as a consequence of what goes along with gray hair and wrinkles, and a reduced stamina, the long-term consequences are Parkinson, Alzheimer, and cancer. And so we need to rethink aging, rethink what it means to be, a disease, and establish further also the goal of doing some more fundamental research and getting appropriate funding for that, also from the government, in universities, because I do believe in the solidity of academic research and the academic institutions, where things can actually promote it on a long-time basis.
If we're quick, we might be able to put in maybe a couple more questions. It depends how long your answer is, of course. I'm going to pick a question from Patty O'Callaghan, who asks about how important is it for you to have things like decentralized tech in the third world, such as AI-driven telemedicine, low-cost prosthetics? Is that something transhumanists should be getting behind and championing, or is that just a kind of band-aid transhumanism, superficial transhumanism?
Wonderful question. I've been working I'm working with transhumanism in South America. So actually, there's now an essay collection coming out, Latin America and Transhumanism, edited by a transhumanist in Chile. And just in order to realize now, and that they're very critical of that, what sort of Musk and Bostrom, or one of the extremely libertarian of the classic transhumanism. So they see now it's just making Thiel and Musk richer and richer. But what's the benefit for us? Now, we need to take sort of the interest of our lower developed countries into consideration. Then I did organize an event on transhumanism in Africa. Martine Rosblatt was part of the event, as well as Aubrey de Grey also gave a talk at that event. It's still available on YouTube. I co-organized it with Leo Igwe, who's again a transhumanist from Nigeria, who again stresses, now there's a lot of there are a lot of prejudices against transhumanism, which says, no, it is just something, it is just something for Switzerland and Silicon Valley. And that is exactly the mind shift which Eurotranshumanism tries to envision. By the way, Eurotranshumanism is not a new way of Eurocentric thinking. It is just, I'm it is a way for people to draw upon, who have that cultural background, drawing upon that thinking from Plato, Heraclitus, and Spinoza, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and so on, and engaging with it. It's more a different way of thinking, which is not at the utilitarian maximizing of gain, of hedonism, of pleasure. So it's more a specific mindset, and sort of the people actually I cooperate with in Chile, they have a very Nietzschean mindset. And so they like Max More, they have a strongly influenced by that Nietzschean way of thinking. So that your transhumanist way of thinking is also come out there, and it strongly stresses the consideration of not only of non-human animals, so expanding the circle to it's not just the human as a coronation of creation, but also to other animals. It is of the CEOs of the big companies, and we need to find ways to make the developments accessible, or to realize the flourishing in the various countries. And one of the insights which is very important which I've always found extremely helpful. For example, South Korea used to be one of the used to be poorer than North Korea about 80 years ago, and now they've set a goal, like the Journal of Posthuman Studies is hosted in South Korea, and they basically changed their mindset towards working hard, being dedicated, focusing on new technologies, and now they've got a living standard which is on a par with that of continental Europe. Same thing even more extreme thing in China. In China, it used to be extremely poor, and now they've changed their attitudes towards innovation, new technologies, and now they've probably made some choices and decisions, and with their decisions concerning the collection of digital data, it might even be difficult for the United States in the near future to keep up with China, in the sense of because they are able to collect all the data and force all the people to share the data with the government. So it is already the case that concerning double-blind peer-reviewed publications, there are more double-blind peer-reviewed publications by Chinese scholars than by US American scholars, just to show something, but it has implications in many different fields. So here we saw a shift of mindset which occurred in China, in South Korea, and as a consequence, it led to economic flourishing. So the different ways of dealing with that. But the important shift is, it is not, as in the case of long-termism, as long as a few rich men survive, it's all fine. No, we need to take the suffering and the interest and the capacities of all persons in the world into consideration. And I do consciously talk about persons, because persons are not just humans. It also means great apes, dolphins, and elephants, and so on. And that has a completely different mindset with some strong political implications. And so, so that transhumanism is not just for Switzerland and Silicon Valley, but actually promotes the great diversity of different lifestyles of the good lives in all parts of the world and beyond.
So I'm sorry for about 12 questions we didn't have a time to reach, and there's lots of very good comments in chat as well, which we haven't had time to deal with. But I will ask as a final point, Stefan, so what is the most important message that we transhumanists should be taking to the rest of the world? What is our distinctive point of view? I mean, Natasha suggests in one of her questions that, well, we've had numerous experts in AI and AGI in the transhumanist world in the past. People like Marvin Minsky, Hans Moravec, Ben Goetzel, Peter Voss. They were all part of the original Extropian mailing list. Do we transhumanists have something really distinctive we should be telling the world about AI? Or are there other things that you would pick out? And here are the 2 or 3 key messages that we transhumanists should be uniting around and shouting from the rooftops.
Well, I think there might be just one insight, which I think I would like to share, which I think we should do our best to promote, because it cannot be just one person who's actually bringing about all of these changes. We need to get the best minds in the world together in order to promote that understanding, in order to make people realize concerning the relevance of an increased health span, in order to make people realize that there is a great diversity of different concepts of the good life which people want to live in accordance with, and that there's and that these technologies and the financial gains should not be in the interest solely of the few CEOs, of the few political leaders in an authoritarian system. And that is something which neither an entrepreneur nor a scientist, nor a natural scientist, a chemist, a physician, a computer scientist, or a philosopher can do by him or herself. It is so it is really forming that community of a shared understanding. And Natasha's done a wonderful job in also setting up a website where she clarifies a lot of misunderstandings which have to do with transhumanism. But the important thing is really to be able to show, to enthusiastically tell, and to convince, and to make people aware of the relevance of what goes along with that altered understanding of which goes along with transhumanism, and to make people, and then have people in the biotech world being involved with the computer sciences in order to increase their life expectancy, their health span. Have entrepreneurs, the people who have the money to support such system. Change the political system by means of political activists, by means of politicians who actually work in the parliaments. Get people from all different parts of the world. Be it in the Philippines, in Nigeria, and Chile. Get them together. Show it is. What we've realized already is incredibly striking. I mean, if you look back in time, if you look back 200 years in time, and you see, the average life expectancy 200 years ago was 40 years and less. And now we've basically doubled our life expectancy in all parts of the world. Even in the lesser developed countries, the life expectancy is significantly higher than it was in England or like in the developed world 200 years ago. So a lot has happened there. Furthermore, sort of even also concerning absolute poverty, the absolute poverty rate in the world globally, it used to be higher than 90% 200 years ago. Even in a developed country like England, it used to be more than 80%. And now globally, that has gone down to 10%, which is still not perfect, but it's still much better than it used to be 200 years ago. And that has consequences. Max Rose from the University of Oxford has done some wonderful research from the website Our World in Data. And he basically managed to demonstrate correlations concerning access to clean water, education, sexual education, having access to healthcare, and the reproductive rate. So the better the well-being, the better, if you've got a place to live, something to eat, education, good infrastructure, then the reproductive rate goes down. And based on that, the studies have found out that the 12 billion human will never be born. And that again has very good consequences and implications concerning worries like overpopulation, global warming, because carbon dioxide emission and issues which have to do with sustainability do go along with like a population explosion. But by making people aware, if you live better, if you have better healthcare, if you have access to reproductive technologies, if you make other people live better in all parts of the world, then that issue of overpopulation will also regulate itself. So, but all of that, that's not one person who can do all these different jobs. So, I love people who go out there and, like Natasha does, and it is very explicit, getting people together in all different fields, going to media, doing that. I'm doing that a lot in academic circles. Others do that in political circles. Jose, David, I mean, I can see how active all of you, and that's the one thing, we realize, the same goals. We have shared understanding concerning the importance of undoing aging, and we're working together, and that's the only thing we can do. We need to get the best minds together in order to promote the great diversity of different lifestyles, of different kinds of flourishing.
Well, I'm going to cheat because I said that was the last question, but I mean, you've raised so many fascinating points in your counter. Is transhumanism the right vehicle to bring all these good minds together? And people may say, yeah, let's have increased health span. Let's have increased health span for everybody. Let's get the best minds of the world together to think about this. Why should they be coalescing around transhumanism?
That's a very good question. And we've seen there's a lot of worry actually concerning the term transhumanism. That's why, I mean, World Transhumanist Association was changed to Humanity Plus. That's why some prefer now to go to like longevity, use different terms. And that's also why I've decided now, and I know Elon Musk present a lot of ideas associated with transhumanism. He doesn't really explicitly talk about that, but he supported the Future of Humanity Institute, and it's clearly transhumanist. It sort of falls into the range of issues which goes along with transhumanism. I use the term transhumanism because well, it's a way of talking about the specific features. And if you want to work scholarly, academically on these different features, it actually helps. You need a specific conceptual verbal framework to do so. But, you know, I'm happy if someone says, you know, and Aubrey de Grey says he's often invited in the Transhumanist Convention. He doesn't usually, you know, he doesn't explicitly refer to himself as a transhumanist, even though, you know, he clearly affirmed these goals. I'm happy that he does so. The most important things is that these goals are getting promoted. I think I find it helpful in order to have a specific conceptual framework of doing so by reference to transhumanism. And so it's a specific terminology we can all draw upon, but I'm happy if these goals are being promoted by someone and that someone is maybe not happy about using that term but promotes a different terminology. So it is about the different, but it's a very good way of collecting different goals, of sharing, really realizing that we have something in common that we are sharing. But the important thing is that the different features which are being mentioned here and which are so beneficial for personal flourishing are being promoted. More important than maybe the term, even though I cherish the term and I continue to use it. But I can see why others might have some reservations about that.
Professor Stefan Lorenz Sorgner, thank you very much for these fascinating thoughts, and I look forward to seeing these discussions continue online, real world, and wherever good minds can be inspired to meet together. Thank you very much.